The hum of the engines vibrated gently through the cabin as Emily Parker slid into seat 12F, her backpack snug against the curve of the window. At 17, she was a nondescript teenager, the kind who blended into any crowd. Brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, oversized hoodie, and worn sneakers that squeaked faintly against the floor. To the flight attendants and passengers around her, she was just another kid on a cross-country flight, heading to visit her uncle in a city she had only seen in postcards. But Emily wasn't ordinary. She carried a small notebook, dog-eared and frayed, tucked tightly against her chest. The pages were filled with meticulous sketches of fighter jets, radar systems, and cryptic notations that no one else could decipher. Lines, angles, coordinates, she had memorized them all, even if she didn't entirely understand what they meant. Her father had left her these journals before vanishing on a classified mission, and Emily had studied them obsessively for years, as though some hidden code would finally reveal itself. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, offering drinks and instructions with practiced cheerfulness. Emily barely noticed. She kept her eyes on the window, watching the clouds roll by like an endless, shifting ocean. Her fingers traced patterns in the air, mapping invisible flight paths she had memorized from the pages in her notebook. Occasionally, she would whisper under her breath, a string of letters and numbers that sounded meaningless to anyone else. Halfway through the flight, the cabin shuddered violently. Overhead compartments rattled. A sharp jolt threw Emily forward in her seat, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the armrests. Passengers gasped, some letting out panicked cries. The flight attendants' faces went pale as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're experiencing turbulence. Fasten your seatbelts." But Emily didn't panic. Her stomach twisted in anticipation, not fear. She recognized the pattern. The rhythm of the turbulence matched one of the flight paths she had drawn in her notebook. The details were impossible to know without instruments, and yet somehow she had predicted it. Her pulse accelerated as she whispered again, a strange, coded phrase that seemed to resonate differently in the cabin's atmosphere. The words were soft, almost inaudible, yet they hung in the air like an electric charge. The flight attendant nearby froze mid-step, her mouth opening slightly as if to speak, then closing again. "Did she just say that?" she muttered under her breath. Emily didn't respond, her focus absolute, her attention consumed by a series of calculations she couldn't explain. Miles above the ground, beyond radar blips and civilian air traffic, the phrase reached ears it wasn't meant to reach. In a dimly lit control room, a row of F-22 pilots froze mid-task. Their screens flickered, lights blinking urgently as the call sign reverberated through an encrypted communication network. 12F Parker, confirm status, barked a voice, tense and clipped, over channels meant to carry only protocol and emergencies. Every pilot within range snapped to attention, fingers hovering over throttle controls, eyes scanning the digital horizon. Back in the cabin, Emily had no idea what was happening outside her small, windowed world. She was only aware of the way her heart pounded, the way the seatbelt bit into her waist, and the trembling of the plane beneath her. The turbulence worsened, a violent, jarring motion that caused overhead bins to rattle and a soda cup to tip over, spilling sticky liquid across a passenger's lap. "Brace for impact," someone shouted, and Emily's instincts kicked in. She pressed her palms against the armrests, tracing invisible control surfaces as if she were piloting the jet herself. Her mind moved with uncanny precision, mapping angles, speeds, and trajectories. Around her, chaos erupted. A toddler began wailing, a woman screamed, and the captain's voice cut through again, strained and urgent. "Stay seated. Fasten your belts. We are experiencing extreme turbulence." Emily's eyes flicked to her notebook, though the pages offered no comfort now. This was not a simulation, this was real. The plane pitched and rolled, every movement forcing passengers to clutch armrests or each other. The overhead bins creaked ominously, threatening to spill their contents. Emily whispered the coded phrase again, her voice steady despite the fear in the cabin. Something about the words, some hidden resonance, seemed to shift the air. She didn't know how or why, only that it mattered. Somewhere far above, the F-22 pilots moved. One whispered to another, "That call sign, it can't be her. She's too young." Fingers tightened on throttles. Heads turned toward radar screens, squinting at blips that hadn't existed moments before. Something had been triggered, a protocol buried in decades of military secrecy, waiting for her name to appear. Back in 12F, Emily felt a jolt run through her spine. The turbulence had become almost rhythmic, like it was testing her, pushing her to react. She inhaled deeply, focusing on the patterns in the shaking cabin. The passengers around her were panicked, the flight attendants shouting instructions, a man holding his phone to record the chaos, trembling as he spoke rapidly into it. Emily didn't look at them. She was aware of something bigger, a pulse that seemed to emanate from the wings, the engines, the very air itself. And then, a sudden silence. The plane leveled, a near-perfect pause in the turbulence that left everyone staring at each other in wide-eyed disbelief. Emily's heartbeat was still racing, but she could feel a strange calm settling into the cabin, as though her whispered call had somehow negotiated the chaos. Her gaze went to the window again, to the endless sky stretching out above and below. She didn't understand the connection, only that it existed. And somewhere in the miles above, where the clouds met the stratosphere, a set of fighter jets adjusted their positions, a silent acknowledgement of her presence. Emily didn't notice the tiny ping on her phone, a notification from a restricted military channel, impossible to reach by civilians, that simply read, "We see you." She slipped the phone back into her backpack without a thought. What mattered was the plane, the turbulence, the strange sense of destiny that had gripped her chest. Passengers whispered to each other, speculating wildly about the turbulence and the sudden calm. Flight attendants exchanged tense glances. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are returning to normal flight conditions. Thank you for your patience." Emily exhaled, but a knot remained in her stomach. She didn't understand what had just happened. She didn't even fully recognize her own voice on the call. But deep down, a sense of inevitability settled over her. Whatever she had triggered in the skis above would not be forgotten. Somewhere far beyond the cabin, radar screens continued to blink. Pilots watched. Fingers hovered. And the call sign, Emily Parker, seat 12F, had made every F-22 pilot snap to attention. Emily leaned back in her seat, eyes closed, clutching her notebook. She had survived turbulence before, she had studied her father's notes, but this was different. This was only the beginning. And as the plane hummed steadily, a shadow passed just beyond the clouds, unseen by the passengers, hinting that the real storm was only minutes away. The moment Emily whispered the phrase in seat 12F, the effect rippled far beyond the cabin, through circuits, airwaves, and encrypted communication channels she didn't even know existed. Somewhere high above, a radar console flickered to life in a dimly lit operations room. Rows of F-22 pilots froze mid-motion, their eyes glued to screens displaying blips that hadn't existed moments before. Every hand instinctively hovered over throttles, every mind alert, every heart suddenly pounding in unison. 12F Parker, confirm status, barked a voice in the encrypted channel, tense and clipped. The sound carried weight, authority, and urgency that made no sense to anyone outside that network. Emily had no idea that her name, spoken softly and instinctively, had triggered the full attention of the most elite pilots in the country. Inside the plane, passengers were still recovering from the turbulence. A few muttered nervously, others clutched their phones and wallets like talismans. Flight attendants tried to reassure them, voices tight with suppressed panic. "It's over, folks. We're back to cruising altitude," one said, though her tone betrayed her own fear. Emily, meanwhile, sat motionless, notebook in her lap, heart racing. She felt no pride, only an unsettling awareness that something massive had been set in motion. Far above, the F-22s shifted formation. One pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, leaned forward, squinting at the radar. "Do you see that? A civilian aircraft, but the call sign Parker. He tapped the intercom and other pilots turned, recognition dawning on their faces. "No way," whispered another. She's alive." Emily had only ever known the phrase as a mnemonic, something drilled into her from the cryptic journals left by her father, a decorated pilot who vanished years ago during a classified mission. The phrase wasn't meant to be spoken aloud. It was a code, a key, a trigger. And yet she had spoken it instinctively, and now, somewhere beyond the clouds, it had unlocked attention, action, and awareness. Back in the cabin, the plane shuddered again. Not turbulence this time, but something subtler, a pull, a minor shift that passengers barely noticed, but that Emily felt in her chest, in her bones. Her hands gripped the armrests as if they were controls, her eyes scanning the horizon through the window. Somewhere far above, aircraft engines hummed, precise, controlled, professional, closing in on her flight path. The captain's voice cut over the intercom again, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are being guided by air traffic control to adjust our route slightly due to airspace restrictions." Passengers murmured uneasily, unaware that these were not ordinary restrictions, that this detour was orchestrated not by bureaucrats, but by elite pilots reacting to a signal they hadn't expected to hear in decades. Emily's mind raced. She had trained in secret with simulations, diagrams, and hours of study, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of it. Her fingers traced the curves of the notebook, instinctively analyzing, calculating. She recognized the patterns forming in the sky, the disciplined movements of military jets, the way they spread, the way they hovered almost imperceptibly. Something or someone was moving to intercept, to protect, or perhaps to test her. Somewhere in the distance, an F-22 pilot whispered under his breath, "I don't believe it, Parker's alive." He tapped the side of his helmet, sending a signal to the entire formation. The planes adjusted their vectors, converging on her flight path like an invisible net. Emily didn't see them, only sensed a shift in the air, a subtle vibration that seemed to hum through the fuselage. The notebook in her lap felt heavier suddenly, as if it were absorbing the energy in the atmosphere, feeding the connection she didn't fully understand. A flight attendant approached, face pale, voice trembling. "Miss, are you okay? You don't seem scared." Emily looked up briefly, calm but focused. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. But inside, adrenaline surged. She had no idea that her composure had made the difference between panic and chaos for the passengers around her. Every subtle movement, every word she had spoken, had already altered events far beyond their comprehension. Meanwhile, the radar screens in the control room displayed blips moving with incredible speed. Unknown aircraft adjusted positions, maintaining a protective perimeter around her plane. Commanders exchanged quick, terse words, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "It can't be her. She's only a kid," one muttered. Another replied quietly, "It doesn't matter. She's the key. We move now or it's too late." The turbulence outside returned, this time sharper, more deliberate. Passengers gasped and screamed as the plane dipped and jolted. Emily pressed her palms firmly to the armrests, scanning the clouds as if she could see through them. And in a strange, instinctual way, she could, not with her eyes but with a sense, a connection inherited from her father's legacy. She whispered the call sign again, deliberately, projecting it into the cabin, into the network, into the air. Above, the F-22 pilots responded instantly. Engines roared as jets veered, forming a defensive pattern around the civilian aircraft. Every maneuver was precise, flawless, rehearsed, as though the pilots were performing an intricate dance only they could see. Emily's whispered signal had activated protocols that had been dormant for years. The pilot's training was to protect, but it was more than that. It was recognition, an acknowledgement that the person in 12F was no ordinary teenager. Emily's heartbeat accelerated as the plane continued its journey, turbulence fatting and returning like the ebb and flow of a storm-tossed ocean. The passengers around her had no idea that their ordinary flight had become an intersection of civilian life and military legend. They were unaware that a teenage girl, clutching a notebook, had just triggered one of the most secret protocols in the country. Suddenly the plane tilted sharply, a gust of wind outside or a technical adjustment. Emily couldn't tell which. She instinctively adjusted her posture, leaning into the movement, calculating angles in her mind. Her whisper came again, almost as if she were speaking directly to the F-22s above. "Hold steady. Maintain formation." Somewhere a pilot chuckled quietly into his comms. "She's controlling it somehow. Parker's in the plane." Fingers hovered over triggers, eyes scanned instruments, hearts pounded. The realization was unanimous. This wasn't a normal flight. This wasn't a simulation. This was real, and she was the link. Emily's eyes flicked to the window. The clouds shifted unnaturally, a subtle clearing revealing shadows just beyond the edge of visibility. Jets 4, maybe 5, moved with lethal precision. Emily's breath caught. She didn't feel fear, not exactly. It was recognition, understanding, a connection to the machinery, the network, and her father's past. The turbulence eased, the engines roared, and yet the tension thickened like a storm gathering strength. Passengers whispered nervously, murmuring speculations. Flight attendants offered reassurances they didn't believe themselves. And Emily sat in 12F calm, yet aware of every invisible movement, every shift in the skis above. Somewhere far beyond reach, a pilot spoke over encrypted comms. "Parker, you are the reason we are here. You are the key." Emily pressed the notebook to her chest, understanding only partially, feeling the weight of a destiny she hadn't chosen but could no longer ignore. And as the plane leveled once again, the faint hum of engines outside indicated that the skis were no longer ordinary. Someone or something was moving with purpose, waiting for her next move. The turbulence had ended, but the tension did not. The call sign she had spoken softly in seat 12F had triggered a chain reaction that no one on board could comprehend. Somewhere above the clouds, the F-22 pilots tightened formation, eyes fixed, hands ready. Emily had no idea that her name alone had commanded attention at the highest levels. And then a flicker on the radar, barely perceptible, something moving fast, closing in. Not hostile, yet not friendly either. Emily's lips parted slightly as she whispered again, almost instinctively, "I'm ready." The air outside shifted. The shadows of jets loomed closer, and the calm of the moment shattered, leaving only anticipation, tension, and the sense that everything, the turbulence, the call sign, the pilots, the secrets, was building toward something far larger than a single flight. The plane shuddered violently, pitching sharply as if the sky itself had taken hold of the fuselage. Passengers screamed, some clutching armrests, others gripping each other like lifelines. Oxygen masks dropped in the rear cabin, and a sharp, metallic groan echoed from the plane's hull. Emily Parker sat rigid in 12F, her fingers gripping the armrests so tightly that her knuckles turned white. But beneath the fear she did not show, a strange calm spread through her mind. She recognized the pattern. This wasn't random turbulence. It was something far more deliberate. Her gaze flicked to the window. The clouds swirled unnaturally, dark and rolling, twisting as though stirred by unseen hands. Emily felt a pull in her chest, a rhythm matching the subtle vibrations of the plane itself. She traced invisible lines in the air, like a pilot adjusting flight controls, instinct guiding her. Her whispered phrases, almost inaudible to anyone else, carried a precision she hadn't consciously trained for. Her call sign had awoken more than the F-22 pilots above. It had activated her instincts, honed over years of secret practice and cryptic instructions from her father's journals. A flight attendant rushed past her, face pale, voice trembling. "Miss, are you okay? You seem unusual, like you know something." Emily gave a fleeting nod, not meeting her eyes. "I'm fine," she murmured, though she was anything but. Her mind moved at lightning speed, calculating angles, speed, wind pressure, the subtle tilt of the aircraft. She could feel the trajectory of the plane, every micro-adjustment the captain was making. To anyone else, it was chaos. To Emily, it was a challenge she had been unknowingly training for her entire life. Suddenly, a sharp lurch threw passengers from side to side. The overhead bins rattled violently. A soda can spilled across the aisle, rolling under seats as passengers scrambled. Emily's head snapped to the window. Shadows moved in the clouds, sleek, precise. Jets, far too close for comfort, were maneuvering in formation above. The realization struck her in a bolt of ice. They were not simply observing. They were responding to her call sign, and yet she didn't fully understand why. Inside one of the F-22s, pilot Lieutenant Marcus Hayes tightened his grip on the throttle. His helmet comms crackled with urgent chatter. "She's in the aircraft," he muttered under his breath. "Confirmed visual, affirmative. Parker's on board. We maintain perimeter. All units stay alert." The other pilots' faces mirrored disbelief. "She's just a kid," one whispered. "This isn't protocol." "It doesn't matter," Hayes replied. "She's the key. Don't break formation." Back in 12F, Emily's eyes darted to her notebook. The sketches, the annotations, the diagrams, they all swirled in her mind now like a living map. She had memorized every movement her father had ever taught her, every contingency, every calculation. And now, in the middle of a civilian flight, she was using that knowledge instinctively. The plane lurched again, but she leaned into the tilt, tracing phantom controls over her notebook, her whispered commands almost rhythmic. "Steady, maintain, align." Passengers cried, some sobbing, some clutching one another. The captain's voice rang out, clipped, strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. Fasten your seatbelts. We are encountering severe atmospheric disturbances." His face was pale but resolute, yet he was unaware that the disturbances were not natural, that a series of elite jets, responding to the name Parker, were hovering just beyond the clouds, maintaining a protective formation. Emily's breathing slowed as she tuned into the subtle vibrations of the fuselage, sensing movements before they happened. Her hand brushed against the small locket hanging around her neck. Inside, a picture of her father in uniform, smiling, confident, mysterious. She whispered his name softly, almost a prayer, almost a command. The turbulence eased slightly. Her fingers tightened on the armrests as a jolt rocked the plane again. She had predicted this. Not through instruments, not through training, but through instinct, legacy, and an uncanny understanding of flight dynamics she had never been taught. In the cockpit, the pilots adjusted. "She's reading it, she's coordinating," Hayes said, disbelief tinged with awe. "No one should be able to do this. She's a civilian, a kid." Another pilot tapped a button, sending a confirmation ping through the network. "It's her. Parker is managing variables actively." The jets outside shifted subtly, a synchronized, almost choreographed dance that surrounded the commercial flight like an invisible shield. Emily felt it, the presence of the F-22s, their engines humming in unison. It wasn't fear she felt, nor complete confidence, but a deep, primal recognition. The sky had become a living entity, every gust of wind a test, every shadow a sign. And she was in the middle of it, orchestrating, surviving, guiding. She whispered again, the phrase precise, deliberate, carrying intent she didn't fully comprehend. "Hold steady." Passengers looked at her now, confusion etched on their faces. "What is she doing?" whispered a man across the aisle, eyes wide. "I don't know," another replied. "It's like she's controlling it." The flight attendants were frozen mid-step, unsure whether to panic or trust the odd calm Emily projected. She had become the eye of the storm, a center of control in the chaos of screaming passengers, rattling bins, and the subtle but constant threat from above. Outside, the F-22s adjusted positions again, faster, sharper. They weren't attacking, weren't threatening, but they were ready, weapons systems online, engines blazing, radar tracking every movement of the civilian plane. In Hayes' helmet, a whisper came, a voice he barely recognized. "She's doing it, she's coordinating the flight pattern in real time." He tapped his mic. "All units maintain perimeter. Wait for further instructions." Emily's pulse raced. The plane pitched sharply again, passengers screaming and clutching anything they could. She leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the horizon through the oval window. Shadows flickered, clouds breaking, revealing the sleek silhouettes of the F-22s moving in perfect formation. She had never seen the jets in real life, only in her father's notebooks and in carefully curated training simulations. And yet, she knew their positions, their movements, their purpose, instinctively. Somewhere far away, a radar blip appeared, moving fast, closing in on her plane. It wasn't one of the F-22s nor a commercial flight. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The call sign she had spoken had drawn attention, yes, but it had also drawn curiosity and potentially danger. Her lips parted slightly. She whispered again, almost instinctively, "I see you, I know you're there." The unknown blip hesitated, then shifted course slightly like a predator reconsidering its approach. Emily exhaled slowly, but the tension in the cabin did not abate. Passengers clung to each other, unsure whether the danger had passed or was merely paused. Flight attendants exchanged glances, one whispering, "This isn't normal. She's calm." Emily's hand brushed the locket again. She whispered her father's name under her breath, a grounding mantra. Somewhere above, Hayes and his team adjusted their formation once more, watching, waiting, holding their breath. The plane leveled, turbulence fading into uneasy calm, but the threat, both seen and unseen, remained. And then, without warning, the plane shuddered violently one last time. A deep metallic groan echoed through the fuselage. Oxygen masks dropped again in the rear, passengers screamed, and Emily's eyes snapped to the window. The blip, fast, precise, calculating, had returned. Someone or something was coming closer. Emily's pulse spiked. She whispered low and determined, "Brace, prepare." The plane lurched, and for a split second everything, the turbulence, the passengers' screams, the F-22s above, the unknown blip, froze in a moment of suspenseful anticipation. Emily's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. She had survived the turbulence before, but this was different. The danger was real, immediate, and unlike anything she had ever faced. And somewhere in the dark expanse beyond the clouds, the blip moved closer, eyes unseen, engines quiet but purposeful. Emily Parker in seat 12F whispered her call sign once more, as if sending a challenge. "I'm ready." The storm had passed for now, but the tension lingered. Something was coming, something was waiting. And Emily, just a kid in 12F, had unknowingly stepped into a web of danger, legacy, and destiny that stretched far beyond the plane. Above the clouds, beyond the sight of civilians, and far from the plane's rattling cabin, radar screens blinked urgently. A cluster of unidentified aircraft had locked onto Emily's flight path, moving with precision that made the pilots tense. These were no ordinary jets, no routine surveillance. Their trajectory was calculated, deliberate, almost surgical. Somewhere, hidden in the layers of classified command networks, military intelligence scrambled to identify the intruders. Every second counted. Emily Parker sat in 12F, her fingers gripping the armrests as the plane rocked once more. She was calm, outwardly composed, but the shadows she sensed in the sky were unlike anything she had anticipated. Her father's old notes had warned of contingencies, of threats that could appear from nowhere, but even those cryptic lessons didn't fully prepare her for this moment. A deep, instinctive knowledge stirred within her, a legacy she had only partially understood. In the terminal hundreds of miles away, Emily's uncle paced. His phone buzzed incessantly with alerts from unknown, encrypted channels he didn't fully comprehend. Some messages contained coordinates, others commands, and one simply read, "Do not interfere." He had known Emily's father, had trained alongside him in secret missions that were never publicly acknowledged. He had watched Emily grow up, aware of her latent potential, yet powerless to explain what she could do now. The turbulence inside the plane intensified. A metallic groan echoed through the fuselage, and a few passengers screamed in panic. Flight attendants shouted instructions, trying to maintain control, but the fear in their eyes betrayed the reality. This was no ordinary flight. Emily leaned slightly forward, tracing invisible lines over her notebook. The pages were worn, filled with diagrams of jets, flight paths, and strategic maneuvers. She didn't need to reference them now. Every movement of the aircraft, every subtle vibration, felt mapped in her mind. And then she saw them. Outside the window, glimpses of sleek, shadowed jets cutting through the clouds just beyond visibility. Emily's chest tightened. These weren't F-22s coming to guide or protect her. She recognized the formation, the precision, the lethal intent. Someone was coming for her. The realization hit like a cold wave. The call sign she had spoken, the signal she had unknowingly sent, had drawn attention, but not all of it friendly. In the F-22 formation above, pilots exchanged tense, clipped messages. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes leaned over the controls, eyes narrowing at the radar blips. "We have unidentified aircraft converging on our flight path. Not hostile, not confirmed, but moving with intent." Another pilot replied, voice tense, "She's a civilian. If they engage, the fallout will be catastrophic." "Orders." Hayes shook his head. "Hold position, observe, prepare to intercept if necessary. Parker is the key." Inside the plane, Emily's mind raced. She had inherited instincts she didn't fully understand from her father, from years of secret practice, from lessons in the notebook she had almost discarded countless times. She pressed the small locket around her neck, feeling the weight of her father's image inside. Memories of bedtime stories about flight maneuvers, evasive tactics, and coded signals surged into her mind. She whispered softly, "I know you're there. I see you." The shadows outside seemed to hesitate, adjusting course ever so slightly. Emily's heartbeat spiked. Her pulse echoed the rhythm of the unknown jets moving beyond the clouds. She realized with a sudden clarity that she was not only being observed, she was being tested. Every instinct, every decision, every whispered word had consequences, and someone somewhere was waiting for her next move. Back on the ground, military intelligence analysts pored over radar feeds. "It's her," one muttered. "The kid in 12F Parker." Another leaned closer, frowning. "We thought she was gone. 8 years, marked dead, classified, gone." The first analyst shook his head. "It doesn't matter. She's alive and they're reacting to her call sign. We need to monitor but do not intervene directly, not yet." Emily's uncle's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the encrypted message, coordinates, a single line, "Protect her at all costs, legacy protocol active." He knew immediately. His heart clenched. Whatever his niece had triggered, it was bigger than any of them, and she had no idea the legacy she had just awakened. In the cabin, the plane pitched again, more violently this time. Oxygen masks dropped, luggage shifted, and a few passengers screamed in terror. Emily adjusted slightly, instinctively aligning her body with the aircraft's tilt. Her whispered phrases grew more precise, more deliberate. "Steady, maintain, align." She felt an invisible connection to the aircraft, to the pilots above, to the shadows approaching. She was guiding the plane, unknowingly controlling the path of everyone on board. Outside, the unidentified jets continued to converge, moving faster now, a subtle but undeniable sense of menace emanating from their formations. Emily pressed her forehead to the window for a better view, scanning the clouds for every hint of movement. Her pulse raced, not with fear, but with recognition. This was the moment her father had prepared her for, though she hadn't known it until now. Inside the F-22s, pilots monitored her every move. "She's reading the turbulence, predicting it," Hayes whispered. "That's not possible for a civilian." Another pilot tapped the side of his helmet. "She's a trained observer, legacy coding, her father's work. She's inherited it." The acknowledgement spread like a shiver through the formation. Parker wasn't just a kid. She was the linchpin of a network thought lost, a signal no one expected to be alive. The plane lurched again, violently. Emily's whispered words followed the rhythm of the vibrations. "Brace, control, steady." Passengers clutched seats, crying, unsure what was happening. But their terror had nothing to do with her. It was the unknown threat outside, the shadows closing in, the sense that the world above the clouds was alive with forces beyond comprehension. Emily's eyes flicked to the notebook once more, the pages flipping lightly in the cabin's pressurized air. She traced diagrams, lines, flight paths, though she didn't need them now. The instincts inside her had awoken, sharper than anything she had trained for. She whispered again, each syllable deliberate, a code that resonated far beyond the cabin. "I see you, hold position." The shadows outside hesitated, then shifted. Someone was testing her, circling her plane like a predator, calculating her reactions, assessing her skill. Emily's chest tightened with a mix of fear, focus, and something she couldn't name. This wasn't a game. It wasn't a simulation. It was real, and the stakes were life and death. Back on the ground, analysts watched the radar screens, silent except for the quiet hum of computers. "We thought she was gone," one said again, voice low. "But she's alive, and now they're converging." The other nodded. "It's legacy protocol. We let it unfold. But this is bigger than any of us anticipated." Inside 12F, Emily pressed her hands to the armrests, whispering her call sign again, low and deliberate. Somewhere far above, Lieutenant Hayes and his team adjusted formation, engines roaring softly in tandem, shields ready. The plane leveled briefly, the turbulence easing slightly. But the tension remained thick, palpable. Someone, a shadow, a threat, a test, was closing in. Emily Parker, just a kid in seat 12F, leaned forward slightly, heart racing, mind sharp. She had survived the turbulence. She had triggered the F-22 pilot's attention. She had awakened a legacy she barely understood. And now the shadows were moving in, bringing with them danger, secrets, and the chilling certainty that her father's past was about to collide with her present. And then one final flicker of movement outside the clouds, just a shadow, fast, precise, closing in. Emily's pulse spiked. Her lips parted, a whisper escaping. "I'm ready for you." The sky held its breath. The plane continued its course, fragile and tense, and Emily's destiny, long hidden, long dormant, surged into motion. The F-22 pilots above adjusted their formations with deadly precision, engines humming in a synchronized, almost musical rhythm. Every pilot's eyes were locked on radar screens and HUD displays, tracking Emily Parker's flight with an intensity reserved for combat scenarios. They weren't responding to a mere civilian plane, they were responding to her. Her call sign had awakened protocols that had been dormant for years, and now the top echelons of the Air Force were reacting in real time. Inside 12F, Emily clutched her notebook against her chest, her knuckles white. She had only ever studied these maneuvers in simulations, in diagrams left by her father, a pilot who had vanished during a classified mission 8 years earlier. But instinct, something deeper than memory, now guided her every move. Her eyes flicked to the window, scanning the clouds as they shifted and swirled like a living entity. The shadows of the F-22s appeared intermittently, their sleek silhouettes cutting through the fog. "Steady, maintain a line," she whispered softly, almost inaudibly, her voice calm amid the cabin chaos. Passengers continued to scream and clutch seats, unaware that the words were more than mere mutterings. They were commands, a resonance that reached the pilots above. The turbulence subsided slightly, responding to her instinctive guidance. In the lead F-22, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes leaned forward, scanning the radar and the skis visually. "It's her. Parker's in the aircraft," he said under his breath, awe creeping into his tone. Another pilot, Lieutenant Sienna Clark, shook her head in disbelief. "There's no way. She's only 17. Civilian. How is she controlling it? How is she predicting the turbulence?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. He simply observed the plane from above, noting the subtle micro-adjustments, the precise angles, the way it responded almost as if it were under her control. Emily's mind was sharp, focused, moving faster than any human could consciously process. Her father's lessons surged through her memory: how to read patterns, how to anticipate environmental variables, how to think like both pilot and strategist. Every instinct aligned. She whispered her call sign again, more deliberate this time: "Parker, engage." Above, the pilots stiffened. The words resonated through encrypted channels, triggering a cascade of reactions. Engines adjusted, positions shifted, radar locks refined. Every pilot knew instinctively that she was no ordinary teenager. She was the continuation of a legacy, the daughter of a man who had mapped aerial combat in ways no one else could. The plane lurched once more, passengers screaming in terror. Emily pressed her palms to the armrests, leaning slightly into the movement, eyes scanning the skis as if she could see through the clouds. And in a moment of clarity, she did not with sight but with instinct. She could sense the positions of every jet above her, the paths they were taking, the intent behind each maneuver. Her whispered commands shaped the rhythm of the flight. Outside, the F-22s adjusted formation again, tighter now, protective. Their engines roared in unison, creating a subtle barrier of sound and presence around the civilian aircraft. Hayes muttered to Clark, voice low but charged with disbelief. "She's orchestrating it. She's not just a kid in 12F, she's controlling the flight pattern." Clark's eyes widened. "It's impossible, and yet." Emily's thoughts flicked to the shadows closing in. The unidentified blips on radar had not disappeared. Someone or something was still approaching, tracking her movements with intent. She pressed her fingers to her notebook briefly, tracing imaginary paths, adjusting her whispered commands. "Steady, hold formation, anticipate." The unknown aircraft hesitated outside the cloud layer, assessing, calculating. Emily's awareness of them was instinctual, visceral, and terrifying. She felt the threat, a cold, precise presence cutting through the haze. Her heart pounded, but she remained calm, guided by the invisible thread connecting her to the F-22 pilots above. "Lieutenant Hayes, are you seeing this?" Clark asked, voice tense. "Yes," he replied, scanning rapidly. She's reading everything, the turbulence, the threats, even the unknown vectors. It's like she's one of us, like she was trained for this." Emily whispered again, the words a precise code, more a signal than speech. "Maintain control, prepare." The F-22s adjusted instantly, engines roaring, maneuvers executed with the precision of decades of training. Somewhere in the control rooms below, analysts leaned forward in shock. "It's Parker," one whispered. "We thought she was gone 8 years ago. She was classified dead. And now she's alive and active." The plane pitched sharply, the turbulence now seemingly reacting to Emily's intent. Passengers were thrown against seats, some crying, some gripping seatmates, while Emily remained focused, whispering the calls like a mantra. The air inside the cabin seemed charged, electric, as if the very atmosphere were listening to her. Suddenly, the shadows outside shifted, faster now, more precise. Emily recognized the pattern instinctively. They were testing her. The unknown aircraft weren't attacking, not yet, but they were gauging her reactions, pressing the limits of her ability. She pressed her fingers to the locket around her neck, inside the small photograph of her father. Memories surged. Bedtime instructions, warnings about threats, stories of impossible maneuvers he had performed, lessons she had half forgotten. "Brace, anticipate, adjust," she whispered, each word resonating through the cabin and beyond. The turbulence leveled again, passengers clinging to seats, terrified but unharmed. The F-22 pilots adjusted their formations in response to Emily's movements, as if she were their commander, orchestrating a pattern they could only half comprehend. Emily's eyes flicked to the shadow approaching from the clouds. A strange calm settled in her chest. She realized that her father's legacy wasn't just about survival, it was about command, awareness, instinct. Every bit of knowledge he had passed to her, every lesson, every code, had culminated in this moment. "Lieutenant Hayes," Clark said quietly, voice tight. She's the real deal, the protocols, the legacy, it's all her." Hayes nodded, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. "And the unknowns, the ones moving in, they won't make it easy." Emily whispered once more, deliberate, calm, and commanding. "Engage the perimeter, protect." Above, the F-22 pilots moved like shadows, engines humming, positions shifting, ready for engagement. The unknown blips on radar edged closer, assessing, calculating. Emily felt it instinctively, the imminent collision of threats, the invisible forces converging. She knew that her call sign had not only awakened the pilots above but had drawn attention from forces that remembered her father and had been waiting for her. Inside 12F, Emily Parker's pulse raced, but her face remained calm. She had survived turbulence, panic, and chaos before, but this was different. This was deliberate, orchestrated, a convergence of legacies, threats, and the living echoes of a man she barely remembered. And then a final, violent jolt. Oxygen masks fell again, passengers screamed, and the shadow approaching from the clouds shifted with lethal intent. Emily pressed her lips together, whispering one last code. "I'm ready for everything." Somewhere above the clouds, in formations tight and deadly, F-22 pilots tensed. Below, passengers clutched each other in terror, unaware of the life-or-death drama unfolding around them. And Emily, just a kid in seat 12F, had just transformed from a terrified passenger into the key, the linchpin, the spark that had awakened legends and drawn attention from forces she had yet to understand. The skis held their breath, and the storm, unseen, unrelenting, unstoppable, was only beginning. The cabin of the plane shook violently as the first real threat manifested. It wasn't turbulence this time. The fuselage groaned under forces that no commercial aircraft should ever endure. Oxygen masks dropped, metal bins rattled, and passengers screamed in a chorus of panic, some crying, some clutching each other like lifelines. Emily Parker remained rigid in seat 12F, her fingers gripping the armrests as though they were controls of a fighter jet. She wasn't afraid, not yet. Instead, a cold, precise clarity settled over her. Outside the clouds, the unknown aircraft revealed themselves. Sleek, black silhouettes emerged, faster than any F-22 could maneuver in a straight line. Their trajectory was deadly, cutting a path that screamed intent: intercept. The F-22 formation above reacted immediately, engines roaring, weapons systems armed. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes and his squadron didn't hesitate. They moved into protective positions, encircling the civilian plane with a precision born of decades of experience. Inside the cabin, Emily whispered again, low and deliberate. "Brace, stabilize, anticipate." The vibrations through the fuselage shifted subtly, almost obediently, responding to her instinctive commands. Passengers clutched each other, terror etched into their faces, but Emily's eyes were fixed on the window, scanning the clouds as if she could see everything at once. Her father's lessons, decades of training passed down through her father's journals, surged into her mind like a flood. Suddenly, a blinding flash illuminated the cabin as one of the unknown aircraft fired a warning shot, a missile streaking past the fuselage, narrowly missing the wing. Passengers screamed louder, some dropping to the floor. Emily's instincts kicked in with terrifying precision. She pressed her palms to the armrests, leaning into the tilt of the plane, whispering again, "Hold course, engage." Above, the F-22s intercepted with lethal speed, maneuvering to block the missile's path. Engines roared, missiles locked, and radar systems blinked in rapid succession. Marcus Hayes tightened his grip, eyes sharp. "All units, maintain defensive perimeter. Parker is coordinating. Do not break formation." Every pilot understood instinctively that the teenager in 12F was now orchestrating their actions, a civilian directing one of the most elite squadrons in the country. Emily's pulse raced, but she remained calm. She could sense the trajectory of the aircraft, the movement of the clouds, the approach of the unknown threat. She traced invisible lines over her notebook, eyes flicking between diagrams she didn't consciously need and the real-time chaos outside. Her whispered phrases were now a command to reality itself. Align, protect, intercept. The first wave of missiles from the shadow aircraft approached, but the F-22 pilots blocked them expertly, guided subtly by Emily's instinctive input. She felt the resistance, the vibrations, every micro-adjustment, as though she were at the center of a vast network connecting the plane, the pilots, and the approaching threat. It was terrifying and exhilarating. A sudden jolt threw a passenger into the aisle. Emily's eyes flicked to the nearest flight attendant, who froze mid-step, her face pale. "Miss, how are you controlling this?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't have time for explanations. She whispered once more. "Steady, hold, anticipate," the plane responded, stabilizing as if recognizing the commands, the words resonating through the cabin and beyond. In the F-22 formation, Marcus Hayes noticed the subtle changes in the flight pattern. "She's predicting every move, every approach. It's like she's reading them before they move." Clark nodded, awe in her eyes. "This isn't just instinct. This is genius. She's inherited her father's talent and amplified it." Emily pressed her locket against her chest. The face of her father stared back at her, a silent reminder of the legacy she had awakened. She whispered his name softly, almost a prayer, almost a command. The plane stabilized further, responding to her intent. Outside, the shadow aircraft adjusted, realizing that the target they thought would be easy was anything but. Then one of the unknown jets made a decisive move, diving toward the plane at high speed. Passengers screamed, clinging to seats as the fuselage shuddered violently. Emily leaned into the tilt, whispering once more, "Engage, counter, stabilize." The words resonated through the cabin, through the plane systems, and impossibly through the air around it. The F-22s reacted instantly, intercepting the shadow jet with split-second timing. Missiles streaked through the sky, flares deployed, engines roared. The shadow jet veered away, narrowly avoiding destruction, but its intent was clear. This was no routine engagement. The threat was alive, calculating, and relentless. Emily's mind raced. She had survived simulations, turbulence, and panic, but this was real. The danger was immediate, lethal, and closing in. She pressed her fingers to her notebook again, tracing paths, angles, and maneuvers instinctively. Her voice, low and deliberate, carried commands: hold, assess, redirect. Passengers were oblivious to the invisible network of signals, instincts, and commands connecting them to the skis above. Flight attendants tried to calm people, but their eyes betrayed their own fear. "Miss, how are you so calm?" one asked. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. Every moment required focus, every breath measured, every whisper precise. Above, the F-22 pilots monitored the entire situation, awestruck. "She's not just coordinating, she's controlling the engagement," Hayes muttered. "Every move we make, she's predicting, anticipating, guiding." "Unbelievable," Clark nodded, her eyes wide. "And that jet, it's testing her. It's trying to draw a response, and she hasn't faltered once." Emily's pulse quickened as the shadow aircraft made another approach, banking sharply toward the plane. She whispered her final preemptive command for the moment: "Align, intercept, neutralize." The F-22s reacted instantly, engines roaring, missiles locked, flares deployed. The shadow jet veered again, narrowly missing the perimeter, but the message was clear. Emily Parker, seat 12F, was no longer a passive passenger. She was the orchestrator, the key, the spark that had awakened dormant protocols and challenged unseen adversaries. Inside the cabin, Emily pressed her forehead to the window, scanning the clouds for any movement, any sign of the next wave. She felt a presence, a weight, a calculation. The shadows outside were relentless, intelligent, and unyielding. She whispered, almost reverently, "I am ready for everything." The plane lurched violently one final time, a metallic groan echoing through the fuselage. Passengers screamed, some collapsing onto seats, others holding each other tight. Emily's fingers traced invisible lines over her notebook, her mind moving faster than any human could process. The F-22s above adjusted, engines humming in unison, ready for anything. And then silence. For a brief, terrifying moment, the turbulence ceased, the engine's roar faded into a tense hum, and the shadow aircraft paused, circling, assessing. Emily leaned back slightly, heart racing, aware that the calm was temporary, a lull before the storm. Somewhere in the haze beyond the clouds, the unknown jets repositioned, preparing for another strike. The F-22 pilots hovered, waiting, eyes sharp. And Emily, just a kid in seat 12F, had transformed the chaos into a battlefield she could influence, a storm she could control, a destiny she had only begun to understand. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her. Every instinct, every training session, every lesson from her father converged in this moment. And as the shadows prepared to strike again, Emily whispered softly, deliberately, "Show me everything, I'm ready." The sky held its breath, and the battle, invisible, lethal, and utterly real, was only beginning. The shadows outside the clouds were no longer hesitant. They moved with lethal precision, banking and weaving as though anticipating Emily Parker's every instinct. The F-22s above adjusted formation, engines screaming, every pilot on edge. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes tightened his grip on the controls, eyes flicking between radar and the visual field. "They're testing her again," he muttered, disbelief and awe intertwined in his voice. "She hasn't faltered, not once. She's controlling the airspace around her." Inside the cabin, the plane pitched sharply. Passengers screamed, luggage shifted, and metal bins rattled violently. Flight attendants clung to overhead rails, trying to maintain composure. Emily, however, remained calm. Her eyes flicked between the clouds outside and the notebook in her lap, tracing invisible lines of strategy and calculation. Every movement of the plane, every subtle vibration, resonated with her father's lessons. She whispered softly, deliberate, almost commanding, "Brace, steady, engage." The words were not just instructions to herself. They were signals that seemed to ripple through the plane, through the air, even through the F-22 formation above. The jets shifted subtly in response, forming a defensive cocoon that moved with the plane as if guided by an invisible hand. Emily's mind raced. The shadow jets were closing in, testing her, probing for weaknesses. She pressed her fingertips to her locket, feeling the weight of her father's face. Memories flooded back, bedtime lessons, stories of impossible maneuvers, cryptic warnings about threats that could appear without notice. Everything her father had taught her was alive now, coursing through her veins, guiding her instincts. Above, Marcus Hayes and his squadron were moving in tandem with Emily's whispers, unaware that their civilian passenger was orchestrating their flight pattern. "She's anticipating every move, predicting trajectories," Clark muttered into her comms. "It's like she's one of us, but she's a kid." Hayes remained silent, eyes locked on the radar. "It's not about age, it's about legacy." Emily's whispered commands grew more precise, each word carrying intent. "Stabilize, intercept, redirect." Outside, the shadow jets hesitated, adjusting their vectors, testing her reactions. The first missile had failed. The second would not. She knew it instinctively. Her chest tightened, heart racing, but fear was a distant memory. This was control, focus, instinct, a legacy inherited, awakened, and sharpened in the crucible of chaos. Inside the plane, passengers were terrified, but Emily's calm created a strange anchor amid the chaos. Some noticed it, whispering to each other, How is she so calm? It's like she's controlling the plane." Emily ignored them, focusing instead on the storm outside, on the shadows that were now positioning themselves for an attack. Suddenly, a blinding flash lit the sky, another missile, streaking toward the plane. Emily's body tensed and she whispered, "Hold, engage." The F-22s reacted instantly, intercepting the missile with a near-perfect split-second timing. The shadow aircraft veered off, banking sharply, engines roaring, but Emily felt their intent clearly. They were testing her resolve, her skill, her legacy. Her pulse raced, but she pressed her lips together, focusing on the invisible network connecting her to the F-22s, to the plane, and to the approaching threat. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Control is not just about flying. Control is about seeing everything before it happens and acting without hesitation. She whispered again, "Align, anticipate, counter." Outside, the shadow jets adjusted, closing in again, faster this time, more precise, almost as if aware that the F-22s were coordinating with her. Emily felt a surge of clarity. This was not a random attack. It was a test. The shadow jets were hunting her, yes, but they were also probing her abilities, measuring her reaction, forcing her to draw upon every lesson, every instinct, every hidden skill. Marcus Hayes tightened his grip on the throttle. "They're aggressive," he said, voice tight, "but Parker's reading them. Every move we make, she anticipates it." Clark shook her head. "She's controlling the engagement, not just predicting it, she's orchestrating it. She's legacy." Emily's gaze flicked to the shadows closing in. She could feel their intent, their calculation, their cold precision. She pressed her hand to the locket, whispering her father's name under her breath. Memories surged, flight paths, evasive maneuvers, coded signals, strategies she had memorized but never fully understood. Now in the chaos of 30,000 feet, they came alive, instinct guiding instinct, action preceding thought. She whispered once more, low and deliberate, "I see you, I know your path, hold." The plane responded subtly, aligning perfectly with the invisible currents of air. The F-22s above tightened formation, mirroring her whispers, engines roaring in perfect synchronicity. The shadow jets made their move. Two of them dove, attempting to breach the defensive perimeter. Passengers screamed, some thrown from their seats as the plane tilted sharply. Emily's whispered commands sliced through the chaos. "Brace, redirect, stabilize." The F-22s intercepted with lethal precision, forcing the shadow jets to pull back, engines screaming, narrowly avoiding destruction. Emily's chest heaved, but her expression remained calm. She had survived the first strikes, predicted their moves, and orchestrated the countermeasures instinctively. She understood now that her father's legacy was not just about survival. It was about command, foresight, and the ability to shape outcomes in the midst of chaos. Above, Marcus Hayes's voice was barely audible over the engines. "She's controlling them, all of them. Every approach, every maneuver, every potential strike, she's orchestrating the entire engagement." Clark swallowed hard. "She's Parker, legacy protocol active, and we're following her lead." The shadow jets hesitated again, circling, calculating. Emily could feel their intent, a precise and measured aggression. She pressed her hand to the locket once more, whispering softly, "I'm ready for everything." The plane leveled, the turbulence easing into a tense hum, but the storm outside had not ended. The shadows were waiting, testing, probing for weakness. Emily Parker, just a kid in seat 12F, had transformed from terrified passenger into the orchestrator of an aerial ballet of life and death. Her whispers guided elite F-22 pilots, countered unseen threats, and turned chaos into control. And somewhere, far beyond the clouds, the final challenge waited, the one that would test everything she had inherited, everything she had learned, and every instinct she possessed. The shadows lurked, silent but lethal. The F-22s maintained their protective perimeter, engines humming in anticipation. And Emily, heart racing, mind sharp, legacy awakened, whispered again, "I am ready." The sky held its breath. The storm, the threat, the legacy, all were converging, and the moment of ultimate confrontation was about to arrive. The storm above the clouds was no longer abstract turbulence. It was a battlefield, alive with intent, energy, and precision. Emily Parker in seat 12F leaned forward slightly, hands pressed to the armrests, eyes scanning the horizon through the oval window. The shadows, sleek black jets moving with ruthless purpose, had closed in. She could feel their calculation, their anticipation, their deadly resolve. Her heart raced, but fear was absent. This was the moment she had unknowingly trained for, the culmination of everything her father had left behind. The locket around her neck pressed against her chest, and with it, memories of lessons, maneuvers, and codes surged into her mind like lightning. Whispering softly, deliberately, engaging control, command, she aligned instinct with legacy. Above, the F-22s tensed, engines roaring in perfect synchronization. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes gritted his teeth, eyes locked on radar blips closing fast. "All units, perimeter tight, protect the aircraft at all costs. She's guiding us, trust her instincts." Clark's eyes widened in awe. "Every move, she predicts everything. She's controlling us. She's controlling the battlefield." Emily's whispered commands grew sharper, more precise. "Brace, intercept, redirect, stabilize." The plane responded as though listening, every vibration, every tilt harmonizing with her intent. Passengers screamed, some clinging to seats, some praying, but Emily's presence, calm, focused, commanding, radiated through the cabin. She was no longer merely a passenger. She was the axis around which the aerial battle rotated. The shadow jets made their first decisive strike. Two of them dove aggressively, attempting to breach the defensive F-22 perimeter. Missiles streaked toward the commercial plane, engines roaring, flares deploying in bright bursts. Emily's pulse spiked, but her whispered command sliced through the chaos. "Hold, counter, redirect, anticipate." The F-22s reacted instantly, intercepting the missiles with lethal precision. The Shadow aircraft veered, engines screaming, narrowly avoiding destruction. Emily could feel their intent clearly. They were calculating, testing her limits, waiting for a moment of hesitation. But there was none. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Control is foresight. Fear is the enemy. You are the axis. You are the signal. Inside the plane, passengers' screams filled the cabin, but Emily ignored them. Her focus was absolute. She whispered again, "Align, anticipate, engage." Every tilt of the fuselage, every vibration of the wings, every micro-adjustment felt like an extension of her own body. She traced phantom flight paths over her notebook, diagrams and codes flowing from memory into instinct. Outside, the shadow jets adjusted, circling like predators assessing their prey. Emily could sense their calculations, anticipate their vectors. She whispered again, a single decisive command. "Now neutralize, protect." The F-22s responded immediately, engines roaring, weapons systems aligned. The shadow jets banked sharply, narrowly avoiding precision missiles that cut through the sky like lightning. Emily's breath was steady, pulse racing, mind alive with clarity. She pressed her fingertips to the locket. Her father's face stared back, a reminder of the legacy she carried, a legacy of instinct, skill, and courage. She whispered softly, reverently, "Father, guide me." Above, Hayes and Clark exchanged tense glances. "She's not just predicting, she's orchestrating," Clark whispered. "Every move, every vector, every strike, she's controlling it all." Hayes nodded, jaw tight. "We're just the instruments, she's the conductor." The shadow jets made another aggressive pass. Emily felt their intent, a direct threat to the plane and to her. She adjusted instinctively, leaning slightly, whispering commands that guided the aircraft's tilt, alignment, and speed. Brace, redirect, anticipate, stabilize. The plane responded with uncanny precision, holding course despite the ferocity of the assault. The F-22s intercepted again, engines screaming, flares cutting through the clouds. Missiles streaked past, narrowly missing the commercial plane. Emily's whispered commands became faster, sharper, almost musical in cadence. Hold, anticipate, counter, engage. Suddenly, one shadow jet attempted a direct strike. A missile locked onto the plane. Emily's instincts flared. She pressed her hands against the armrests, whispering, "Now align, intercept." The plane banked subtly, tilting perfectly in harmony with her intent. Above, the F-22s reacted instantly, intercepting the missile with split-second timing. The shadow jet veered away, engines screaming in defeat. Emily exhaled slowly. The immediate danger had passed, but the threat remained. The shadows circled, calculating, waiting, probing for weaknesses. She pressed her hand to the locket once more, whispering softly, "I see you, I know your path, I am ready." Inside the cabin, the passengers slowly realized the chaos had stopped for now. Flight attendants looked around, awe and fear mingling in their eyes. Some whispered, "Who? What is she?" Others simply stared at the calm figure in 12F, unaware that she had just orchestrated the survival of the plane and its passengers. Outside, the sky seemed to tense, the shadows hovering, testing, measuring. Emily leaned forward, eyes sharp, instinct guiding her like a living map. She whispered again, "Engage, protect, neutralize." The F-22s responded immediately, shifting formation, engines roaring, ready for the next move. Then the final confrontation began. The shadows made their decisive pass, engines screaming, missiles locked. Emily's voice was calm, strong, deliberate. "Now hold, counter, engage." Every tilt, every vibration, every adjustment was guided by her. The plane moved as if alive, dancing through the storm, synchronized with the protective F-22s above. The shadow jets faltered. The F-22s executed a coordinated interception, forcing the attackers to retreat. Emily felt it instinctively. The threat was neutralized for now. But the tension lingered, electric, palpable. She whispered softly, "It's over for now, but I am ready." Above, Hayes and Clark exhaled. "She did it," Clark whispered, disbelief and awe in her voice. She controlled it, all of it. She's incredible. Hayes remained silent, eyes scanning the retreating shadows. She's legacy, she's the signal, and we just followed her lead. Emily leaned back slightly in 12F, heart pounding, mind alive with clarity. The plane stabilized completely, turbulence gone, the storm outside easing into a tense calm. She pressed her hand to the locket, whispering softly, "Thank you, Father. I am ready for what comes next." The passengers slowly exhaled, some hugging one another, some whispering prayers of relief. But Emily knew the battle above was not the only one she would face. The legacy she had awakened, the abilities she had inherited, and the forces now aware of her existence would shape the rest of her life in ways she had only begun to understand. And somewhere above the clouds, the F-22 pilots maintained their vigil, engines humming, eyes scanning for threats. They had witnessed a civilian teenager become the orchestrator of one of the most precise aerial defenses in modern history. They had followed her lead, protected her, and survived because she had awakened a legacy thought lost. Emily Parker, just a kid in seat 12F, had transformed. From terrified passenger to orchestrator of the skis, she had awakened her father's legacy, faced the shadows, and emerged victorious, but aware that the story was far from over. She had claimed her place in the air, in the legacy, and in a world that had forgotten her existence. The sky was quiet now, but Emily knew it was only temporary. The threats would return, the legacy would demand more, and the call sign she carried would continue to ripple through the clouds. She looked out the window, eyes sharp, heart steady, and whispered one final phrase, low and deliberate, almost a promise. "I am Parker. I am ready." And as the plane soared into the fading light of the horizon, the storm behind her and the legacy ahead, the world held its breath, because Emily Parker had just become more than a passenger. She had become a force, a signal, a legend.